is the haters think they're having an effect on us. And if the haters knew how much love was out there and how much support was out there, they'd shut their freaking mouths.
Friendship is based upon confidence. How many times silence now to say I'm doing the offensive?
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And today we're going to be reacting to Danielle Bergoli on Dr. Phil.
Whoa, what the fuck do you think you're doing here, Benji?
What on earth do you think you're doing? Shut up. Well dude, since you've been changing your content recently, I thought I would modernize it. That's the word you use, right? Modernize? Oh, look at me, I'm The Right Opinion, and this mutiny of my content creation hub is a travesty. Let me publish a thesis on this catastrophe. I love to use a prolific amount of big boy words because I'm insecure about my monocle.
You are not an invited guest. Goodbye. This is a Right Opinion video, not a democracy. And although topics have changed, I'll still be covering some more serious issues that you're familiar with. Basically, I'll be doing what I find fun and somewhat original, and I hope you guys in the TRO family will find it fun too. But let's talk about family for a moment. Whether that family is biological, adopted, or just a group of people that you share a unique connection with, they play a real role in shaping you as a person and can help you through some of your hardest times. That should never be underrated. But what if that family is Greg Paul? Well, that's the scenario that Jake and Logan find themselves in. It makes sense, he's their biological father, but he's not your normal dad of a YouTuber, the one who stands, hopefully supportively, on the sidelines. He clearly enjoys basking in the spotlight, and on principle there is nothing wrong with that. I'm of the belief that age should not constrain one's capacity, and even if the doorway is via nepotism, they may still have the character, independent from the familial factor, to redeem that. The 54-year-old is a character without a doubt, but he clearly does want to involve himself in his son's lives, and we'll touch on this later. Jake and Logan Paul have established clout within their own rights, but still appear to appreciate the presence of their father. In one event, which I won't be discussing today, Gregory here featured in one of Jake's videos and made out with a fan, and although it's weird and marginally unsettling, it's been ran into the ground by everyone under the sun, and I think people have mostly made their mind up on it. However, it is important that we provide some background for what inspired this video. It was May, the Earth was rotating on its axis like any normal day, but it wasn't any normal day for Team 10. In fact, it was quite an eventful period of time for Jake Paul and his comrades, because on May the 5th, the COO of Team 10, Nick Crompton, you know, the person who claimed that England was his city, stepped down. Nick Crompton had been noted for his staunch devotion to Jake Paul, and even in his divorce statement, he kept it relatively civil and urged people not to blindly hate on Jake. However, an indirect recipient of the underlying message within the letter seemed to be Mr. Gregory Paul himself. It was also not long before Chance Sutton, another highly distinguished member of the troupe, decided it was time for him to part ways, and eventually, after a fair bit of digging, various hypotheses were stated. The main one being that Greg Paul in question had assumed control of many of Jake's assets within the Team 10 business, and had since been making some ruthless cut. To put it quaintly, he had taken up the role of Team 10's own personal human resources department. There were some elaborate stories, some that included various details of possible merger, and more individual developments that we'll discuss later, but that is the core story that is mostly confirmed from both sides. I follow this vaguely, and often it's something I would not rather touch on, but I do believe there is a greater commentary that can be made out of Greg Paul, his demeanor, and various relationships that this story encompasses. Both Jake and Logan have their fair share of controversies, Logan with the obvious and Jake with the consistency, and once again I stress that Jake and Logan can act how they want, and the public will judge them as they do, but if they want to be slightly more positive role models than the ones they're currently, a mediating actor could be genuinely beneficial. However, what I found today tends to lend support to the fact that this could actually be rather detrimental. No one's obliged to be great human beings. However, if you want to lecture people on what's right and what's wrong, you better practice what you preach, something that I find fundamentally lacking for all parties involved today. I never do things lightweight here, and although I'm leaning very heavily on the trending topic genre more over than I ever have in the past, do not expect any less of a serious analysis with various hypotheses integrated. This is what we do here on The Right Fucking Opinion. So, without further ado, let's get to it.
I should make them say, oh my God, hey, I ain't done shit all my life. Hey, I'm about to spend about 5. Hey, I'm about to spend all this money.
I think it's best to start an analysis with a bit of background. Greg Paul started up his Vine in light of Logan and Jake's success, and although the Vine account doesn't appear to be up anymore, I found a compilation of clips that seem to reflect the sort of content that he made. Given the fact that obviously his sons had Vine accounts too, it's fairly easy to compare and contrast the sort of content that they produced. Logan and Jake had a high energy style that, whether you find funny or not, clearly had its appeal. It was well produced, the punchlines were mostly on point, and their choice of topics were diverse enough to have a novelty while similar enough to retain an audience. Greg's content tended to revolve around a few things, either captioning videos on the internet, interacting with his family, or yoga. It's an interesting compilation. Now, as intriguing as the yoga might be, I'm more interested in the second point there. You see, through these, Greg Paul built his reputation as Logan and Jake Paul's dad. Duh, I hear you say. Well, that's who he is. But it's not that simple. For example, I assume most of the audience watching this video have parents, but those parents don't go around branding themselves as your parents, although it is factually true. A significant proportion of Greg Paul's Vine and subsequent YouTube content is dedicated to the misadventures with his two sons. It makes sense, and I'm not saying it's a necessarily bad thing, but it does set up premises for later statements. It means that instead of really growing his own clout, nearly all of his followers are confined within the Paul brothers circle. This also means it makes a lot of interactions between the Paul family public, which is okay again, considering Greg does seem to enjoy it. But when dealing with certain levels of drama, although it is family nature to defend the ones you love, other times responding can just make you look worse, and trying to justify unjustifiable actions becomes much harder when you have journalistic attention. Now, on the surface, a fair majority of his content is fairly harmless. However, you can see how a mindset is created in most of his, quote, harmless content that follows into some of the more challenging videos of his, particularly those surrounding drama. So to get to the crux of the matter, we have to brush away at the surface first. I think it's time to discuss the manufactured love. Everyone needs a bit of love in their life, but Greg Paul milks that simple fact until the cows come home. It's kind of a meme. The more senior individuals within society act slightly unnaturally online, but Greg Paul seems to be a victim of that theory. He bases his actions on the notion of love. He's the sort of guy who would punch you in the name of love.
If the haters knew how much love was out there and how much support was out there, they'd shut their freaking mouths.
If there's one video that kind of pushes this example, it's the video in which Greg Paul confronts paparazzi. Now, it would take someone very talented to make me feel sorry for individuals who follow you around everywhere and take pictures, and I'm not sure Greg Paul quite achieves that, but I'll give him points for trying. Being loud and obnoxious? Being all in your face? It's all for the love, my man. Gotta have that love. I've been talking about intentions a lot on this channel recently. I said in my Nicole Arbor video, the good causes do not absolve terrible execution. I do believe that many of these adults are quite aware of that. They're not stupid. I think Greg Paul's expression of this notion is excessively transparent, but nonetheless, in spite of its contrivances, some people still eat that shit up. Despite the simple truth that if he'd done all the same things just out of anger or vitriol, he wouldn't be given the same treatment. Why is this? Well, people like to justify their actions, even when their actions may seem illogical to the individual in question. Now, I have no doubt that there is a rationale behind the way that Greg Paul behaves, but love is not that rationale. Love is what he uses as a shield to deflect the idea that sometimes he behaves in a less than socially aware manner. This becomes increasingly transparent when you turn to some of the more controversial statements that he put out. My favorite video being the one he posted on his Instagram in response to the scrutiny Logan received, many of it, I'd argue, justifiably so. He made this statement.
Yo, folks, what's happening? GP coming at you. Hey, a couple things I want to let everybody know that Logan is coming back. That is a definite. A little bit of the bus update. I put a new insulated floor in. I've got some kitchen cabinets going in. I got a couple dressers I'm going to use for storage. And it's coming along nice. I'm having fun with this thing. Also, the amount of love that has been coming has been unbelievable. The amount of people showing support is unbelievable. And I am now calling you guys super fans. Because, you know what's crazy is the haters think they're having an effect on us. And if the haters knew how much love was out there and how much support was out there, they'd shut their freaking mouths. The haters will never, ever have an effect on the Paul family in the way that they want to make it happen because the love is too strong. We all make mistakes. Dr. Phil even said, hey, Logan's a good kid. He's made a mistake. He's 22 years old. Push through it, get over it, and keep moving on. Anyways, love you guys. Love the support. GP's out.
What Greg has done here is create a dichotomy from his earlier content, where he preaches love and kindness. And therefore, what he does here is equivocate his being to love. And therefore, if you are opposed to the Pauls, you are thus opposed to love. And on top of that, you're not just opposed to love, you are a hater. There is no clarification on the sort of hate. He doesn't qualify it with any statement. It's just the haters won't get to him because he's got all this love inside of him. Listen, there were clearly people who probably responded to Logan's actions, as irresponsible as they were, in an irrational and disproportionate manner. But Greg doesn't concern himself to clarify that he may be addressing a fringe group. He's more interested in blanket statements and labels to give his fans that validation. And even if he was addressing a fringe group, it would seem like a deflection anyway, especially if you're not going to directly address it. Also, general terminology saying that people you claim to be haters would, quote, shut their freaking mouths if they knew about all the love you have is a bit of a contradiction. Greg always appeals to these basic emotional concepts as a way to distract from the fact that there is no real way to defend how people act sometimes, but as long as he holds down that love sector, these people, they're just haters, and he's got the love right here to hold them off. So what was Greg referring to when he mentioned that transcendent concept of love that was just out there? Well, one of the other observations I made was how Greg likes to reflect and discuss all the people that he and Jake have assisted, and Logan of course. I believe he uses this as mental justification in his own head for the wrongdoings that may be committed.
I have had DMs with a lot of people talking about issues, talking about them trying to commit suicide, and I've responded to a lot of people. Said, hey, be strong, appreciate your writing, things like that.
I also noticed this on one of Jake's diss tracks, in which he responds to criticism by talking about the great stuff he does.
Don't know the pain, bitch, I know the pain. Man, where was y'all at when I was on the email trying to stop the press fans from killing themselves, man? Where was y'all at when I was in the kitchen whipping up meals for kids on Thanksgiving? Where was y'all at when I was with the teacher?
If you fuck up, and you accept you fuck up, the best thing to do is remember that you have the capacity to do good with that influence, rather than attempting to retell all the times that you have done good, or noting it as some general love, because by doing that, it immediately trivializes the actions that you have committed and the motivations for committing them. As the famous philosopher Cool Cat once said,
I have a saying, true integrity means you do the right thing when no one is looking.
I'd also like to bring attention to what I call the loyalty card, which isn't exactly the one you use in the supermarché per se. No, I mean the sort of one that's used by people when they thank those for standing by them through the tough times. In this instance, Greg Paul's use of the loyalty cards upgrades the fans to super fans,
And I am now calling you guys super fans.
which of course means absolutely nothing to anyone above the age of 12, but is a sort of emotional reward that may gratify the sort of unconditional supporter of the Pauls. It's always nice to experience appreciation from those we admire. However, most of us are at that age where we realize the impersonality of YouTube celebrities saying it through the screen. Basically, it probably doesn't mean much. But if there's anything that the Paul fanbase has taught us, is that people are still very easily influenced. Now, the loyalty card isn't an intrinsically bad asset. Plenty of creators have it and use it on a regular basis. It is natural in a way. But when you abuse it to the level of Greg Paul, the loyalty becomes a tool to override logic. And I want you to hold on to this point for later. It's been a while since I've had a guest on, so I thought I'd mix it up and bring in my good friend Urbot, also known as WoollyOne, and he did some research into Greg Paul's cyberbullying escapades. Not sure what that is? Well, you're in for a treat. Take it away, my friend.
Hello everyone, I'm WoollyOne, contributing apologist on the Right Opinions channel. So Greg Paul, being a 54-year-old man, has found it difficult to fit in on the internet. From some of his videos, it's clear he simply does not understand how basic things that YouTubers deal with every day work. And it's not just through his somewhat cringy persona, it's through the ideas that he has suggested. The example we are going to look at today is cyberbullying. Now, cyberbullying is a very new form of harassment because it takes place on a very new medium, the internet. It's also an incredibly easy form of harassment because you can get the satisfaction of speaking your mind about another person without having to see their reaction live. Louis C.K., you know, the comedian, the guy who, he put it best in an interview with Conan O'Brien.
You know, kids are mean, and it's because they're trying it out. They look at a kid and they go, "You're fat," and then they see the kid's face scrunch up and they go, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good to make a person do that." Right. But they got to start with doing the mean thing.
Because these insults are bytes and data seemingly posted by one person and received by another, Greg Paul thinks this issue can easily be solved. About a year ago, Greg Paul posted a very interesting video titled, "Cyberbullying is Real! My Thoughts on Everything Logan and Jake Paul. Hashtag the second verse." He starts off by addressing some of the hot rumors at the time, particularly the Alissa Violet situation, which James will touch on later. He makes a really weird point about perception versus reality where he calls out Jake and Logan's own pranks by name, and he tells you that they were staged.
Just remember, a lot of the same people coming at me really believed Jake was in the White House. They really believed Dwarf Mamba was shipped in an airplane. none of it was true.
But then he tries to connect it back to the truth and how the viewers perceive the truth.
And a lot of it is somebody's perception of how they saw things.
He basically leaves you with the impression that it was the viewer's fault that they didn't understand that the pranks were staged. And in a similar way, they don't understand the Alissa Violet situation. It's a very loose connection that doesn't really seem to help his case. After all, if Jake and Logan Paul wanted their viewers to get the right idea about their content, why don't they just not lie to them? About 5 minutes in though, he switches gears. You see, in his coverage of this Alissa Violet situation, he's received a great deal of hate. Now, most YouTubers would probably just block and ignore them, but Greg Paul has a different idea. Instead, he proposes a cyberbullying database where people are named and branded as cyberbullies.
Guess what, folks? It's already too late. She can't defend herself. So what I'm going to do, and what I'm partnering with some people that specialize in cyberbullying, we're going to try to create a database where these bullies can be put into one location for future employers, colleges, boyfriends, girlfriends, moms, dads, whoever. If they want to look into a person and see if they've been cyberbullying anybody, all they need to do is put that in there.
And this database can be accessed by, well, pretty much anyone. Parents, teachers, employers, significant others, and yes, the police. If this idea sounds extremely Orwellian and horrible, you're thinking at least a little more rationally than Greg here. There are so many problems with a database of this nature that become immediately apparent. For example, that most threats are made anonymously, and without an extremely invasive police investigation, the only identification people would have access to would be their general location, if that at all. But let's assume, as Greg does, that one would be able to easily log this information. He still essentially wants a 9-year-old telling you to KYS to be treated with the same severity and seriousness as a 60-year-old homeless man whipping his dick out in front of preschoolers on a playground. Even to most of the technologically inept, this sounds incredibly stupid and ineffective. Not to mention how easy it would be to fake the evidence with Inspect Element or Photoshop, two things that Greg probably hasn't even heard of. It just wouldn't work. And while Greg may be a seasoned human being, he's not a seasoned YouTuber, so he just doesn't get it. Well, fast forward a year and prepubescent YouTube commenters with anime profile pictures have not been rounded up and shot into mass graves yet. So what happened? Well, nothing, I guess. For a few months after his video, he continued talking on Instagram about how he was definitely going to create this database and how he was going to do it right. Like his video, he also mentioned working with the LAPD to get it off the ground. And each time he promised to do away with these vile cyberbullies who'd been sending hate to him, but it just never happened. There still is no database, and I doubt there ever will be. Why? Well, maybe he realized how much of an idiotic concept this was from the numerous comments and dislikes on the video. Or maybe he never had any intention of creating such a database, and only conceived of it as a threat to freak out those who were insulting him. Perhaps he was just doing it to make himself look better, especially considering it was in a video about an already highly controversial topic, using it as yet another means to shove his love down your throat and evade criticism. I think that one of the conclusions that can be drawn from the Greg Paul cyberbullying saga is that the man himself seems deeply concerned about others when something happens to him. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, in the video, he states constantly about how he doesn't care about all the hate he's received.
Guess what? I don't care what you call me. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're calling me a faggot and you think it's offensive, where are you? Are you living in 1952? This is 2017. If you got an issue with somebody and their sexual orientation, that's too bad for you. Those aren't my issue. The fact that you're calling me old and bald, I don't really care. A lot of you guys said, you know why Pam and I got divorced? Listen, 50% of the couples out there get divorced. The 50% that are married, another 25% want to get divorced. So trying to slam me because I got divorced doesn't bother me. It has no value.
It's all water off a duck's back for him. He's so resolute that you can call him a faggot. And if you're not down with the gays in 2017, well, that's your problem. However, Greg Paul is so concerned that it might happen to someone else that isn't as strong and resolute as him that he wants to set up this database that takes down everyone who says something mean.
All you folks that sent me the hate mail, I think you're going to be the first ones that I expose and let the general public know that you guys are out there trying to be bullies.
And listen, there's nothing wrong with looking out for other people, but when you suddenly start caring about something for the sole reason of it happening to you, saying that you don't care about the fact that it happened to you seems fairly hard to believe. And it seems like a real attempt to switch the fact that he's upset about what someone did to him as a way to simultaneously look better, like a crusader against all those bad, nasty bullies. But this is just indicative of how Greg Paul really tries to find anything that's happened to him as a way to pole vault himself into relevancy. He needs the spotlight to be on him, so by seizing the opportunity to do something revolutionary, in his head, it would give him that attention, even when his reaction, as I showed earlier, is completely irrational and symptomatic of his technological naivety. Anyway, back to you, Jimbo.
As noted earlier, this was part of a greater video on the Alissa Violet situation, in which she left the Team 10 house. Both Jake and Alissa told very contrasting stories about what exactly happened within the premises, but Greg Paul then decided to join in and tell his own story, which is interesting to say the least. In this story, he declared that Alissa wasn't kicked out for cheating, as Jake claimed, or anything else, but she was removed for not paying rent.
Alissa wasn't kicked out of the house. She was asked to leave because she wasn't paying rent.
And at the center of this bizarre story is the father, Mr. Greg Paul himself, who, in spite of barely turning up in either of the other members' testaments, apart from a cameo in Alissa's where she claimed he verbally abused her in public,
Ooh, this is the best part. The other day I ran into Greg Paul, Jake and Logan's dad, and I was like, hey, straight up. He's like, shut the up, get out of my face.
he had a leading role in his story. In this retelling, Alissa Violet was belligerently remaining in the Team 10 house and she would not budge. Greg Paul, the gracious, cogent gentleman, sat down with her and gave her some top-notch advice that Greg Paul, the man himself, managed to bring her time at Team 10 to an end.
She agreed to leave to me, through me.
In case you've noticed an undertone of sarcasm in my voice, it's because I am being fucking sarcastic. And frankly, this is some of the thickest bullshit that I've heard in a while. Greg Paul claims that a lot of Alissa Violet's allegations cannot be backed up.
Alissa says a lot of things. They can't be backed up.
Before making a number of unsubstantiated claims himself and just saying, well, it's the truth.
She did miss auditions because of not being able to wake up and make it on time. These things are all the truth. These things actually happen.
I also find it amusing that he has to interject multiple times in the video to remind the viewer that he is telling the truth and reminds us all that everyone in Team 10 likes him because he's hard working for those people.
I know the truth. These things are all the truth. These things actually happen. Of course, a lot of you guys out in Cyberland don't know that because you don't know the truth. I know the truth. Incidentally, none of the Team 10 members have an issue with me because they know I help everybody out. Alissa, truth be told, she knows I always looked out for her. I always try to help her out.
I'm not saying that he's not, but the self-validation is pretty suspicious. To prove his moral worth, he says that his level of truth is so strong that there are lawyers who have offered to take his case for free against Alissa Violet, but he's not going to do that because he's above all the petty drama. He's above the lying and the hatred. He's so moral. Don't we all wish we could be like Gregory here? Not quite, right? This tells me two things. Firstly, that Greg Paul is a pretty bad liar. There are multiple cues for lying, most notably the disturbing amount of times he licks his lips in that video. Which in comparison to his other videos is quite disproportionate, but who cares, maybe it was a hot day. Greg's lips have just been so dry in need of that constant moisturizing. Maybe a boy just thirsty. After all, the biggest indicator that he's chatting shit is the story doesn't even match the one told by his son Jakey here. Jake claimed that Alissa cheated on him, but maybe he was wrong too. Maybe Greg is actually Thanos and is using the reality stone to manipulate the world that Team 10 lives in. It's still more plausible than any of the stories that Greg is actually telling. Greg also has this perfect way of twisting what people say. He states that Alissa saying that she thought he was going to pull a gun out was unfair, which as a point, a standalone point, I guess, stands, but then goes on to say this.
Now please keep in mind that this is the same person who said in her own video she wanted to kill somebody and she thought she was insane.
Which, given the additional context, is a blatantly dishonest way of framing it, and anyone who understands basic rhetorical devices knows exactly what she's implying.
You like love, and then you could just hear them like banging another girl upstairs, and that's happened so many times. Like, it's not, something clicks in your head. Like, you want to kill someone, but you want to cry.
And I think you do too, Greg. All I'm saying is you're not making a good case for yourself here, buddy. In fact, in another video where he once again truthfully recollects a story of the Martinez twins and their departure, he drops the disclaimer that he often makes very little eye contact with the camera, and that is normal behavior, so don't try and investigate him for lying.
This is not rehearsed, I'm just going raw, and for any of you knuckleheads that are going, I look left or I look right, and you're gonna try to analyze what I'm saying or if I'm lying or telling the truth or blah blah blah.
After all, if you act like a liar all the time, people can't specifically call out the lies, although the licking lips are pretty excessive. Tasty. What I found from all these videos is that Greg likes to insert himself into these situations and be as intimate to the drama as possible. He takes credit for the savage shirt that the Martinez twins wear, says that they were referring to him as a dad, and wanted him to be their manager before this other manager came in and disrupted the whole situation.
At some point, they're like, hey, you be my father. You know, they talked to me as if I was their dad.
Every story involves him, despite many of the anecdotes from other individuals within the Team 10 house seldom including him. The details that Greg provides would lead you to believe that he's actually a member of Team 10, let alone involved in it. Why this level of involvement though? Well, one reason appears pretty obvious, that it's good for views and interaction, and people always want to hear the hottest takes from those in the know, and Greg Paul is definitely in the know. He's just not entirely in the tell. The other idea is that he likes to see himself as involved in his children's lives, which isn't a completely unreasonable explanation either. As I said at the start, he brands himself as the father to these two icons above all other representations of his character, and his content plays into this narrative. But I want to reintroduce a couple of points that I mentioned briefly earlier. A lot of the issue that the Paul family tends to culminate is that their interactions are out in the public eye, and that's not a huge issue as principle, but as families we are more likely to defend each other because we believe we know the character of the individual better than the criticism from the outsiders, and these people are intimate to our lives. We don't want conflict by publicly shouting them down, and frankly I wouldn't expect Greg Paul to go around publicly lambasting his children, and if you want to defend them then that's not necessarily a bad thing either, but there comes a point where defending an individual not just comes at a detriment to you but to them and other individuals around them. If there's one thing that Jake and Logan's behavior has taught us, is that they are really in desperate need of some real-world experience. They're hardly children, but you'd be hard-pressed to find behavior that matches their respective maturity. Whether it's obnoxiousness or just plain insensitivity, they seem to have all the boxes ticked. Much of their behavior seems to lean onto the fact they don't recognize the implications that their actions have on those around them. As implied by this video, I find Greg Paul's rhetoric rather dishonest, but on top of that, I find it quite hawkish. It's one thing to defend your children, but it's another to then try to assassinate the characters of those who make these allegations. Gregory's preaching all this love while simultaneously making highly questionable and unsubstantiated claims against people, attacking their character with anecdotal evidence which, given the additional context, seems rather doubtful. But even then, consistently dismissing his detractors on all fronts does not look good by any means, and most worryingly it creates an atmosphere in which no lessons are really learned. The whole way to right your wrongs begins with accepting that you may have committed those wrongs here and there. All this little investigation has shown to me is that our mate Gregory here doesn't really wish to acknowledge that. In response to the Logan Paul scenario, the best he could say was, "We all make mistakes," and appeal to Dr. Phil, which once again is not false, but is underplaying the circumstances. You also write a paragraph in the description about how they sometimes do stuff you disagree with. This is not a case of agreement or disagreement, and portraying it that way is very myopic. The thing is, in the context of modern society, many people have standards of how they should treat others. Everyone's kind of differs a bit, but there is a baseline. Most of what has been discussed today is not a case of different strokes for different folks. It's about showing some respect to a fellow human being. The issue that Greg Paul creates is when he dismisses those who confront him, and being prepared to seemingly lie about these situations, that he cements himself as a constant scapegoat for whatever destructive actions Jake or Logan may commit. It enables them, knowing that they have that unconditional parachute, but sometimes they need to freefall. You don't have to publicly shit on them, but you just have to stop trying to make up these very transparent excuses for what is fairly deplorable behavior. As I noted at the start of the video, Greg Paul had recently been called in and he was conducting an audit, and Nick Crompton leaving was a huge moment for the ensemble, and the differences seem fairly obvious from the inception of this incident. However, very shortly after this, Team 10 put out a very bizarre statement on their Twitter, which seemed to echo much of the attitude reflected in Greg Paul's behavior, in a worrying totalitarian attitude. Notice the excessive and transparent use of the loyalty card, and this is something that Greg Paul clearly values himself above all other aspects. In his video over the Martinez twins, he lamented the fact that he was right about Max, another former Team 10 member.
First day I met Max, I told Jake, do not use Max, do not trust him, and you know what? Max ended up leaving, and everybody found out later that I was right about him. I was right about Morgan. I am totally shocked.
Despite the fact that Max left because he was uncomfortable with how the pools were presenting a possible assault case against FaZe Banks, one that seemed incredibly dishonest. Yet Greg Paul sees Max as a negative actor, despite the fact that Max's move was one of the most arguably moral in the history of Team 10. Greg saw it as a selfish action. How could he do that to people who gave him such an opportunity? That's because Gregory sees its influence as a collective. Everything good that has come from Team 10 outweighs the bad, and from his perspective, if people stop trying to milk all these negative actions, then the collective could just carry on spreading this joy and this love. Through this love premise, Greg has always the loyalty card to maximum gain, telling us about how he knows all the people who have had their lives enhanced by Team 10. You are there for Team 10. You are subservient to Team 10. Also, I thought it'd be interesting to note how the little text started much like the Instagram video, with that chunk of gratitude to the fans for their support. Its contrivance almost nauseating. The aura that this statement gave off was much alike to a cult. If you are disloyal to what Team 10 represents, then you are struck off. But that would premise that Team 10 is a positive force, which is a bit more up for debate than Greg presents it to be. He forgets that although Team 10 may have supposedly enhanced some people's lives, it could also have negatively affected others. The other factor that Greg doesn't seem to take into consideration is the alternate reality, where Team 10 doesn't exist. Now, it's here, sure, some people may have found purpose within it, but they may have found a different purpose in something more productive if Team 10 didn't exist, and it may not be beneficial for them long term. But Greg doesn't work on that level of reasoning, and therefore, because Team 10 is so helpful, people should respect it regardless of what they do. The ends justify the means in his mind, but his idea of means are different to many of his critics, so it doesn't matter how allegedly rude or aggressive he is, it's for Team 10, it's for love. Judging from its language, I think it's fair to assume that this little message had at least a bit of Greg sprinkled on it, and this takes me to my next point. Jake Paul made a video himself addressing the situation, in what was 20 minutes of unbelievable waffle that would put me on my most drunken tirade to shame. He stumbles through an explanation of how there's a future and how he's planning for it and how the people who left were afraid of his visions. Amongst the filler that was clearly done for the ad rev, I did find some statements of meaning, and I think they can tell us something about the sorry situation that he finds himself in. Two parts stood out, the part in which he discusses his father and the one that follows on from this. But what does he say about Greg specifically? Well, he said he needed someone to unconditionally fight his corner with the increasingly ambitious visions and ideas. He needed someone with more life experience to step in and help with possible individuals who might suck away that Jake Paul exuberance. And you know what? I'd probably do the same thing in his position. However, the issue that this creates is a character evolution, because what Jake has in mind is more audacious and likely more bombastic behavior. One moment that I found distinctly symbolic was how he almost said he wanted to become the best person, before suddenly changing a qualifying statement to the best Jake Paul.
I want to be the best, like the best Jake Paul, like I said, for you guys.
The thing is that these two are distinctly different statements, and Jake realizes that. I spoke about respect and decency earlier, and Jake needs someone to challenge that attitude rather than condoning it, especially if he doesn't want to burn out. There is no doubt that Jake will continue to be successful, and let's say Team 10 is a positive force. If it has brought joy to many people's lives, then fair enough. We can always do better, and when people call out individuals like Jake for his destructive and reckless behavior, whether Team 10 is a net positive is kind of regardless when it comes to these issues. If you can do better, why wouldn't you do better? Greg just doesn't accept this, and under the premise that Team 10 is a force for good, publicly dismisses and attempts to smear other individuals in the name of that good cause, but most importantly, not encouraging self-reflection, not just within your family, but within fans, who for some reason then see you justifying actions and using the loyalty and false notion of positivity to blow off others as haters, while formulating your own plot lines. I'm sorry, but for someone with life experience, you should know better. What Greg Paul is up to in Team 10, I cannot be certain. It is not mine to prove, but although it may provide Jake with some business grounding, I can't see it being wholly beneficial for many other aspects. Jake Paul needs someone who is going to support him, but is also going to correct him. He's been in this world 21 years, and he needs the right guidance now he's actually trying to deal with life. Unfortunately, or fortunately, life is not one long Vine clip. Equally as unfortunate, Greg does not seem the person to alleviate the problems that have been observed by multiple commentators. On the contrary, his behavior seems to lead to reinforcement, which I personally believe will not lead to favorable outcomes. This brings me to my second point about Jake's video, the idea that it was best for Jake. The problem is that Greg is solely concerned with Jake, but what is best for Jake is not necessarily best for Team 10, and when you continuously cause people from Team 10 to leave, the people inside will inevitably become expendable and lose the draw that they gave to the squad. It becomes Jake Paul and his background dancers, and it will inevitably lead people to question whether there even is a necessity for Team 10. So although people saying Team 10 is falling apart is an exaggeration, it does cause a possible loss of identity. The starting lineup established identity for themselves, the new ones appear to lack that, but either Greg Paul doesn't know or doesn't care. Once again, loyalty matters, but so does logic. It will inevitably become the Jake Paul show, which, if that's what you want, then fair enough, but I don't want more Jake Paul in my life. The idea of Jake Paul having complete free reign is slightly concerning. Whether Jake Paul is conscious of this himself is a different question, but either way, I do not see Greg benefiting Jake as an individual, nor Team 10 as a collective. I'm not saying it's going to happen soon, but if it does, we know why. At the centre of the Paul family, we find a man who, although may not be the image of the brand, is certainly exerting influence on a day-to-day basis, either over his sons, over an audience, or over others around him. Whether that influence is positive, as I present today, is highly tentative, and the means that he uses to exert it, even more dubious. That man is Greg Paul. What do you think of the situation? What is exactly going on here? I would love to hear what you think. Leave your comments down below, I'm always interested to hear. You can also reach me on Twitter, @TheRightOpinion. You can reach me on Facebook, I'll leave the links there. And you can also reach me on Discord too. I'll put my server in the link below. You can reach out to me through any of those mediums. I tend to respond to all of them. I do my best to be a responsive gentleman. Also, big shout out to the editors. They've once again done a stellar job, and I'm just imagining right now how this is going to look. And oh yes, that's very pleasing indeed. Also, big thanks to WoollyOne and RD Benji, whether invited or uninvited. I appreciate them nonetheless. Anyhow, love to hear your thoughts once again. Until then, however, I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.